Hello and welcome to this summary of our class from Wednesday the 26th, I think 26th of, um, of February. So we're at the end of February already. On Wednesday, the most significant thing that we did was some close reading of the Yehoshua text facing the forests. Um, I had asked everyone to please bring to class at least one passage from the story that that you found notable for some reason. To turn my music down. That you found noticeable for some reason, notable for some reason, the language, the imagery, the metaphor that the language carried, that the passage carried, something, whatever um, you were struck by in that passage. Um, most of you, I think, most of the class was prepared for that. Some were not. I was a little concerned because people um, seem to be choosing passages near the very beginning of the story, which led me to wonder how deeply into the text um, people had read. So it is very important to read the whole story, not just a few of the initial pages, and hope that my discussions of the text will fill in the rest. Before we got started with the close reading, I talked about a problem that we all face. We come to passages in the texts that we're reading that we find impenetrable, that we find very difficult to tell what it is exactly that the writer is trying to say. It's not always that the page doesn't always give up its the writer's exact intention the first time that we read a passage. I want to argue that that is okay, that we should not feel uncomfortable if we can't immediately determine what a writer is trying to say. And so I would encourage you to get comfortable with that. You read the passage, you read it again, and you read it 2 or 3 or 4 other times, and you try to think about it, the best you can. If you are especially diligent, you will go and you will seek out articles in the secondary literature about the work that you're reading, and find scholars who have parsed that text. And these kinds of scholarly efforts will shed light sometimes on these difficult to understand passages. Other times you have to simply let them lie there on the page and move on. That is okay. This is not to say that you should read a passage, say, oh my God, I have no idea what this writer is saying, so I'm just going to pass it by. No, you're going to let it cook. You're going to leave it on the simmering on the back burner, as it were, and you're going to mark it as a passage that you haven't quite penetrated yet, and then you'll read on. But it is a good idea, so when you're going to have to be writing about texts, to eventually get clear, get some idea about what that passage that you're stumbling over is all about. So you might want to talk to your professor. That would be me. You could ask your peers And as I said a moment ago, you could go to the secondary literature and look at other analyses. Sparks notes and e-notes and those kinds of things are often very useful. I don't encourage you to start with those kinds of crutches, but they're not bad resources sometimes when you're trying to figure out a difficult passage. Now, continuing on from this point, extending this point, this concern with passages we don't understand, it is our natural instinct to think, oh my, I don't understand this. This text must be too hard for me. And your reflex may be to want to retreat into something that is easier, that is that gives up its meaning from the page much more readily. And again, what I want to argue, I want to try to persuade you of, is that reading difficult texts is actually good for us. It stretches us. Of course, we can read texts that instantly give up their intention, that are easy to decode, to interpret. Of course. How do we grow as readers if that is the only kind of reading that we do? Well, the answer is we don't. We grow as readers and as interpreters of texts by reading texts that are, quote unquote, too difficult for us. And we stretch ourselves to come to grips with those more difficult texts. It is always easier just to pass over things. Let that go, let that go past you in the jet's contrail, trailing back of the airplane, and don't come back to it. But that's not really the best, most mature, intellectually mature thing to do. Go back to the passage, work on it some more, talk to your professor, look into the secondary literature, and do your very best to eventually come to an understanding of that passage. But you don't have to immediately understand everything you read. An indication, a sense that you're not getting a text is not a reason to abandon that text. It's all the more reason to engage with it, to stay with it, and let it cook on the back burner and come back to it. Okay? I would like very much to reproduce here some of the close readings that we did of Facing the Forests on Wednesday, but that's really not within the scope of a class summary. I would call your attention, though, if you were not in class on Wednesday, I would call your attention to a passage on page 112 of your PDF of Facing the Forests. It is the second paragraph indentation on 112. It begins, "Then suddenly fire. Fire unforeseen, leaping out of the corner, a long, graceful flame." This is the climax of the story, and this is a wonderful story. This is a climax of the story where the fire watcher and the Arab collaborate, in a sense, to set the forest on fire and then watch it as it burns to the ground. In this passage, there are a number of things that draw on the Jewish calendar and on Jewish ritual practice that are not immediately obvious. And I'll just mention a couple of them. If you look at the third sentence, I'm reading from the second paragraph indentation on 112. The third, I believe it's the third sentence, begins, a long, graceful flame. One tree is burning, a tree wrapped in prayer. You have to remember that Yehoshua was writing this in 1963 for an Israeli audience, a Jewish audience. Now, a Jewish audience, his readers, would instantly recognize a metaphor there. The image of the tree, the burning tree, wrapped in prayer. The reference there, what is wrapping the tree, is the Jewish prayer shawl, the tallit, Tallit. The tree is wrapped in prayer. The references to the tallit. It's also important to know that this fire is being set on two very important Jewish holidays. One of which is Yom Kippur. The other is Hamadin. Let's think about Yom Kippur for a moment. The purpose, the meaning of Yom Kippur, it is a day of atonement for Jews. When Jews ask God to forgive them of their sins. The irony, of course, is that here is a Jew collaborating with an Arab to burn down Israel, because the forest is a symbol for an allegorical figure for Israel. What more amazing and horrific transgression, or sin, if you will, could a Jew commit than burning down the Jewish state symbolically? What's the significance of that? Yehoshua has this occurring on the Jewish Day of Atonement. So this is just a taste of the kind of close reading that we did on Wednesday, and I would encourage you to pay very close attention in your reading of this wonderful story, because there is such a richness of interpretive texture here. It is endlessly rich and available for exploration. That's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed this summary. I hope it's been of help to you, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.